Welcome to Reddit Nightmares, where the internet's most disturbing true confessions come to life. Hit subscribe if you're brave enough for more real horror confessions that will follow you into your dreams.
Two came to document the abandoned Whispering Pines mental hospital from my urban exploration channel. I never expected to become trapped inside during the worst storm of the year, or to discover I wasn't alone. As night fell, the whispers began, and I realized someone who knew every hidden corner of this forsaken place was hunting me. What happened in these halls decades ago was trying to repeat itself, and I was becoming part of its story. The video camera's familiar weight in my hand was reassuring as I stepped over the threshold of Whispering Pines Mental Hospital. Cold air rushed past me, carrying the musty scent of abandonment, damp plaster, rusted metal, and something else I couldn't quite place. Something medicinal, perhaps lingering after all these years. Hey, explorers. I spoke into the camera with practiced ease. Lucas Markham here, coming to you from what might be my most ambitious location yet, the infamous Whispering Pines Psychiatric Hospital in rural West Virginia. I panned the camera across the crumbling reception area, where faded mint green paint peeled from the walls like diseased skin. Gray light filtered through dirt-encrusted windows, illuminating dust particles that swirled in my wake. The front desk, a massive wooden monstrosity, stood sentinel before a wall of empty mail slots, each one a tiny prison cell. Abandoned in 1987 after a series of patient deaths and accusations of experimental treatments, this place has been untouched for decades. The locals avoid it. They say the screams of former patients can still be heard on quiet nights. I laughed nervously, my voice echoing off the decaying walls. Guess we'll find out if there's any truth to that, won't we? The forecast had mentioned a chance of rain, but the dark clouds gathering outside the broken windows suggested something more severe. I wasn't concerned. I'd explored in worse conditions, and the store would only add to the atmosphere of my video. My subscribers loved that authentic, creepy vibe. The hospital sprawled before me. 3 floors of corridors, patient rooms, treatment areas, and who knew what else. According to my research, Whispering Pines had once housed over 300 patients, many of whom never left. The more disturbed patients were kept in the basement level, where they wouldn't disturb the more treatable cases above. I checked my equipment. Camera with night vision capability, extra batteries, flashlight, my exploration pack with water and energy bars, and the floor plans I'd managed to find online. Everything was in order. Let's start with the East Wing, I said to camera. According to my research, that's where they kept the women's ward. But first, I pulled out my EMF detector, a recent addition to my gear. Most of my subscribers were skeptical of the paranormal angle, but it added viewer engagement. The needle remained steady as I waved it around the reception area. All quiet for now. Let's see if that changes deeper inside. The women's ward was a long hallway with rooms on either side, most of their doors hanging half off their hinges. Each room was small, barely fitting a bed frame and small cabinet. Some still contained remnants of the past. A hairbrush with brittle bristles, a weathered photograph too faded to make out the faces, a single shoe with its leather cracked and warped. In one room, I found what appeared to be scratch marks on the wall beside where the bed would have been, for parallel lines, repeated over and over. Jesus, I whispered, running my fingers over the grooves. Can you imagine being so desperate to get out that you do this to your own fingers? A low rumble of thunder answered me, much closer than I expected. I turned to the window, surprised to see how dark it had become outside. The storm was moving in fast. Might need to cut this exploration short, I told the camera. But let's at least check out the doctor's offices and treatment rooms before we go. The administrative section was in better condition than the patient areas. Wooden paneling lined the walls, and some of the furniture remained. Heavy desks covered in dust, filing cabinets with their drawers pulled out and emptied. In one office, more elaborate than the others, I found a collection of framed credentials on the wall. The glass was covered in a layer of grime, but I could make out the name, Dr. Malcolm Reeves, Director of Psychiatric Services. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed immediately by a crack of thunder that shook the building. I jumped, my heart racing. That was close, I said, forcing a laugh. Storm's right on top of us now. As if on cue, Rain began pounding against the windows, an aggressive drumming that filled the silent halls. I decided it was time to leave, but as I navigated back to the labyrinthine corridors, the rain intensified, turning into sheets of water that obscured everything beyond the windows. Wind howled through broken panes, and the temperature dropped noticeably. By the time I reached the reception area, I knew I wasn't going anywhere soon. Water was already pooling on the floor near the entrance, and when I tried to open the front door, a gust of wind nearly knocked me off my feet. Storm outside was now a full-blown tempest, the kind that uprooted trees and flooded roads. "Change of plans, explorers," I announced, trying to keep my voice steady. "Looks like we're waiting out this storm. Perfect opportunity for a more thorough investigation, right?" I tried to sound enthusiastic, but an unsettling feeling was creeping up my spine. Being trapped in an abandoned mental hospital wasn't part of the plan. I checked my phone. No signal, as expected in this remote location. With no choice but to wait, I decided to explore further, heading toward the cafeteria area. The large room was eerie in its emptiness. Rows of tables bolted to the floor, a serving counter with rusted metal shutters, and a wall of windows that showcased the fury of the storm outside. Another lightning strike illuminated the room, and for just a split second, I thought I saw a figure standing at the far end of the cafeteria. I swung my camera in that direction, but the darkness had returned, revealing nothing. "Hello," I called out, my voice small against the drumming rain. "Is someone there?" Only the storm answered. I told myself it was a trick of the light, perhaps a shadow cast by the lightning, but my hand trembled slightly as I adjusted the camera. "Just checking out the cafeteria," I narrated, trying to maintain my professional demeanor. Can you imagine the scenes that played out here? Hundreds of patients taking their meals, many heavily medicated, watched over by orderlies and nurses. I moved toward the kitchen area, pushing through swinging doors. Industrial-sized ovens and refrigerators loomed in the darkness, their surfaces rusted and dented. The smell was worse here, mold and rot and something else, something chemical. As I swept my flashlight across the room, it caught on something reflective on the floor. I moved closer and found a small metal object, a key, old-fashioned and heavy in my palm. "Look what we have here," I said, holding up to the camera. "Wonder what this opens." The key had numbers etched into it. 237. A room number, perhaps? A loud crash from somewhere in the hospital made me jump. I held my breath, listening. It sounded like a door slamming, but in this weather, it could have been anything. A loose window, something falling. Probably just a storm. I reassured both myself and my future viewers. But as I stood there in the darkened kitchen, key clutched in my hand, the crash was followed by another sound, a shuffling, dragging noise, like something being pulled across the floor. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time. The dragging stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. I swallowed hard, telling myself to be rational. Old buildings made sounds. They settled, they creaked, especially during storms. I decided to head back to the reception area, closer to the exit, but as I pushed to the cafeteria doors, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The hallway looked different. I was certain I had come from the left, but now both directions looked unfamiliar. "That's weird," I mumbled, checking my floor plan. According to the map, the reception should be to the left. So I turned that way. The corridor stretched before me, darker than I remembered. My flashlight beam seemed weaker, struggling to penetrate the gloom. Doors lined both sides, most closed, unlike the open doors I had passed earlier. After walking for what seemed too long, I realized I should have reached the reception area already. I consulted the map again, squinting at it in the dim light. I think I took a wrong turn somewhere. I admitted to the camera, this place is like a maze. I decided to try one of the doors, hoping to reorient myself. The first one I tried was locked, as was the second. The third door opened with a groan of protest, revealing a small office with a desk and chair. What caught my attention, however, was the wall behind the desk. It was covered in photographs, dozens of black and white images of patients, their faces vacant, eyes staring past camera. and in the center, a larger photograph of a man in a white coat, his stern face gazing directly at the viewer. My flashlight beam focused on the nameplate beneath the photograph, Dr. Malcolm Reeves, the same name from the credentials I had seen earlier. This must have been his office. I moved closer to examine the photographs, and that's when I noticed something unsettling about them. In each one, standing slightly behind the patient or doctors, was the same figure, a tall, thin orderly with hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed too dark, too deep. "That's creepy," I whispered, leaning in for a closer look. Same guy in every photo. Lightning flashed again, and in the momentary brightness, I saw something written on the back of the office door that I hadn't noticed before. Moving closer, I realized it was a list of names, scratched into the wood with what must have been a sharp object. Some were crossed out. The last name on the list, not crossed out, made my heart stop. Lily, my name. "Okay, that's fucked up," I said, my voice shaking. I backed away from the door. Someone's playing a trick. But I knew that wasn't possible. No one knew I was coming here today. I hadn't announced this location to my subscribers yet, wanting it to be a surprise. Unless someone had followed me. The thought sent a chill through me. I quickly left the office, deciding to find a way back to the reception area and wait out the storm there, even if I had to break a window to escape. But the corridor outside seemed to have changed again. The doors were now all on the left side, whereas before they had been on both sides. I checked my map once more, but the layout didn't match what I was seeing. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered, a note of panic creeping into my voice. I chose a direction and walked quickly, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The dragging sound started again, somewhere behind me, closer this time. I walked faster, turning corners at random, no longer consulting the map that seemed useless now. The hospital was playing tricks on me, or my mind was... Either way, I needed to find an exit. After several minutes of increasingly panicked navigation, I found myself in a part of the hospital I hadn't seen before. A large metal door stood at the end of a short corridor with a sign above it, "Hydrotherapy." Despite my fear, my documentarian instinct kicked in. Hydrotherapy in old mental hospitals often meant torture rather than treatment. Ice baths, high-pressure hoses, forced submersion. I tried the door and found it unlocked. Inside was a large tiled room with drains in the floor. Several rusted metal tubs lined the walls, large enough to hold a person. The air was damp and cold, with a faint smell of chlorine that had somehow survived the decades. "This is a hydrotherapy room," I narrated, my voice echoing off the tiled walls. Patients would be submerged in ice water as a way to calm them. They believed the shock would knock the insanity out of them. As I swept my camera around the room, I noticed dark stains on the floor near one of the tubs. I knelt down to examine them, and my stomach turned. They looked like old bloodstains, long dry but never properly cleaned. A soft sound made me freeze, a whisper, so quiet I almost missed it beneath the storm's fury. I held my breath listening. There was again a whispered word that sounded like, "My name?" "Who's there?" I demanded, standing up quickly, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the room. No answer, just the pounding rain and distant thunder. I backed toward the door, unwilling to turn my back on the room. As I reached for the handle, my elbow knocked against something on a nearby table. A patient file, yellow with age. Curiosity momentarily overrode my fear. I picked up the file and opened it. The photograph clipped to the inside made my blood freeze. A young woman, maybe 25, with long dark hair and hollow eyes. Despite the gender difference, there was a striking family resemblance in the bone structure, the eyes, the set of the jaw. The name on the file read Elizabeth Markham. My last name. I dropped the file as if it burned me. Pages scattering across the floor. This couldn't be a coincidence. Someone was messing with me. Had to be. Very funny. I shouted, anger briefly eclipsing my fear. "Whoever's doing this, show yourself." From somewhere in the darkness beyond the door came a sound I will never forget. A low, raspy laugh that raised the hair on my arms. I bolted through the door, no longer caring which direction was correct. I just ran, turning corners blindly, my camera clutched in one hand, flashlight in the other. Corridors seemed to stretch and twist before me, leading me deeper into the hospital rather than toward an exit. Doors slammed behind me, though there was no draft to explain it. My flashlight began to flicker, the beam weakening. No, 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 I pleaded, slapping the flashlight against my palm. It stabilized momentarily, then dimmed again. I checked my camera's night vision mode, grateful for the technology. The green-tinted view revealed a junction ahead. 3 possible directions. I chose the rightmost corridor, hoping it would lead to a stairwell or exit. Instead, I found myself in what must have been the nurse's station, a circular desk surrounded by glass windows that looked out onto a large open ward. Rows of bed frames filled the space beyond the windows, some still with tattered mattresses. I paused to catch my breath, listening. The dragging sound had stopped. But now I could hear something else, a soft tapping, rhythmic and deliberate, like fingers drumming on a hard surface. I swept my night vision across the station, but saw nothing. The tapping continued, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. My flashlight died completely, leaving me with only the camera's night vision. I set it down on the desk, adjusting it to give me the widest view possible of my surroundings while I searched the drawers for batteries, matches, anything. The drawers contained old patient logs, pens dried up decades ago, appointment books with faded entries. Nothing useful. When I looked back at my camera, the screen showed something that hadn't been there before, a figure standing among the beds in the ward. Its back to the camera. It was tall and thin, wearing what looked like a white orderly's uniform, darkly stained around the edges. I stifled a scream, grabbing the camera and turning it toward me so I could see behind me directly. There was nothing there. I looked at the screen again. The figure was still visible, closer now to the nurse's station, still facing away from me. This isn't real, I whispered, but my body wasn't convinced. My heart pounded so hard I could feel in my throat. I backed away from the windows, toward what I hoped was a door leading out of the station. My elbow hit a switch on the wall, and suddenly, impossibly, lights flickered on in the ward, dim, yellowish lights that should not have worked in an abandoned building. In the sickly glow, I could see the figure clearly now, still with its back to me. It wore a stained orderly's uniform, its head hanging at an unnatural angle. Slowly, terribly, it began to turn. I didn't wait to see its face. I ran, finding a door and bursting through it, into yet another corridor. The lights came on here too, flickering and weak, illuminating my path in stuttering bursts that were almost worse than darkness. As I ran, doors began opening on their own, just a crack, as if someone was peeking out at me as I passed. Whispers filled the air, too many to make out individual words, but somehow I knew they were talking about me. I found a stairwell and took the stairs 2 at a time, heading down, hoping to find the ground floor. Instead, I found myself in a corridor lined with heavy metal doors, each with a small grated window at eye level and a slot at the bottom. The secure ward where they kept the most dangerous patients. The lights were stronger here, revealing clearly what the darkness had hidden. The walls were covered in writing, names, dates, pleas for help, all scratched into the paint and plaster. And everywhere, repeating over and over, "Don't let him in." I moved slowly now, afraid of what might be behind those metal doors. Through the first window, I saw an empty room with padded walls, torn and stained. The second room was the same. In the third room, something moved in the corner, a dark shape that uncurled itself as I watched, rising up the wall like smoke forming a human outline. I stepped back, bumping into the opposite wall. A sound escaped me, something between a gasp and a whimper. The shape pressed against the window, a face forming out of the darkness. Hollow eyes, gaping mouth, skin like wet paper. I ran again, past door after door, not daring to look inside any more of them. At the end of the corridor was an elevator, its doors standing open as if waiting for me. Without thinking, I rushed inside and pressed a button for the ground floor. The doors closed with a groan of metal, and the elevator began to descend. The overhead light flickered, casting jumping shadows. I pressed myself into the corner, camera held before me like a shield. When the doors opened again, I found myself now on the ground floor, but in what had to be the basement. Concrete walls, pipes running along the ceiling, air thick with moisture, and that same chemical smell I'd noticed earlier, stronger now. I was about to press the button to return to the upper floors when I saw something that stopped me, a light, warm and steady, coming from somewhere down the corridor. Not the sickly institutional lights from upstairs, but what looked like candlelight. Against my better judgment, drawn by the promise of another human presence, I stepped out of the elevator. The doors closed behind me with finality. The corridor led to a large room filled with equipment I didn't recognize. Machines with dials and straps, metal tables with restraints, cabinets full of glass bottles. A research lab of some kind, but nothing that should have been in a mental hospital, even in the 1980s. In the center of the room was a table, and on it, burning with a steady flame, was a single candle. Beside it lay a leather-bound book, open to a page filled with handwritten text. I approached cautiously, camera trained on the book. The handwriting was cramped and frantic. The words pressed hard into paper. The procedure works. Transfer is possible, but the cost is too high. The patients die every time. All except Elizabeth. She's fighting it, holding on somehow. Reeves says to proceed anyway. Says what we learn will change everything. I can't do this anymore. God forgive me for what I've already done. The entry was signed Dr. James Foster and dated September 12, 1987, just weeks before the hospital was shut down. I turned the page and found a photograph paperclip to the next entry. It showed a group of doctors standing around a patient strapped to a table. The patient's face was obscured, but they were connected to one of the machines I could see in the room with me. Standing at the head of the table, overseeing the procedure, was a man from the photographs upstairs, Dr. Malcolm Reeves. And behind him, watching from the shadows, was the orderly I had seen in every picture, his hollow eyes now clearly fixed on the camera. The next page contained just 3 lines. Elizabeth died last night. Reeves is proceeding with the final subject tomorrow. He says the orderly has chosen her already. God help us all. The final entry was dated October 31st, 1987. It's loose. Reeves is dead. Everyone is dead. I've locked it in, but the storm is washing away the barriers. It will escape tonight. If you're reading this, run. It needs a new host, and it will find one. It always finds one. The candle flickered as if disturbed by a breath, though the air was still. I looked up from the book and saw, reflected in a darkened window across the room, a figure standing behind me. I whirled around, but there was no one there. When I looked back at the reflection, it remained, orderly, watching me with those hollow eyes. You're not real, I said aloud, my voice breaking. The reflection smiled, a terrible stretching of lips that revealed blackened teeth. And then the candle went out. In the darkness, I heard movement, soft footsteps circling the table, coming closer. I fumbled with my camera, switching to night vision again. The green-tinted view showed me the room was empty, but I could still hear the footsteps. I backed away, toward what I hoped was a door. Elizabeth, whispered a voice right next to my ear, dry and rasping like dead leaves. I screamed, dropping the camera. It clattered to the floor, the screen cracking but still functioning, still showing the empty room even as I felt cold fingers brush against my cheek. I ran blindly, finding the door more by luck than design. The corridor outside was now lit by emergency lights, red and pulsing, casting everything in a bloody glow. I had to find a way out, had to escape before what? Before I became like Elizabeth Markham? Before whatever had escaped found its new host. The storm continued to rage outside, lightning flashing through a few windows in the basement corridor. In the brief illumination, I saw a sign pointing to maintenance and emergency exit. I followed the sign, hope flaring in my chest. An emergency exit would have to lead outside, storm or no storm. The maintenance area was a maze of narrow corridors lined with pipes and electrical panels. I navigated it as best I could, following the exit signs, ignoring the whispers that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. Finally, I saw it, a heavy metal door with an exit sign glowing faintly above it. I rushed toward it, grabbing the handle and pushing with all my strength. It didn't budge. I tried again, ramming my shoulder against it. The door rattled, but held firm. It was locked or blocked from the outside. No! I moaned, slumping against the door. Please, no. Behind me, the red emergency lights began to fail, plunging sections of the corridor into darkness one by one. The darkness moved toward me like something alive, consuming the light. With the exit blocked, I had only one choice: find another way out or hide until the storm passed. I chose to move, to keep searching, to not let the darkness corner me. I made my way back to the maintenance area, trying different corridors, looking for stairs that would lead up and hopefully to an unblocked exit. The darkness followed, always just behind me, bringing with it the sound of dragging footsteps and whispered names. Eventually, I found a stairwell leading up. I climbed as quickly as I could, the stairs seeming to multiply beneath my feet. Just as I was about to collapse from exhaustion, I reached the door. Pushing through, I found myself back on the ground floor. The reception area couldn't be far now. I oriented myself as best I could and began moving toward where I thought the front entrance would be. The storm had intensified, if that was possible. Rain lashed against the windows with such force I feared they might shatter. Wind howled through the building, carrying with it strange, distant cries that might have been the wind itself or something else entirely. As I turned a corner, I saw it, the reception desk, and beyond it, the front doors. Relief flooded through me. Even if the storm was still too dangerous to venture out into, I could wait near the exit, ready to run as soon as it subsided. I moved toward the doors, but as I did, the figure from a photograph stepped out from behind the reception desk, blocking my path. In the flesh, he was more horrifying than any photograph could capture. His orderly's uniform was stained with what I now recognized as old blood, his face gaunt and gray, with skin that hung too loosely, as if it wasn't quite his. But it was his eyes that froze me in place, black pits that seemed to have no bottom, no end to their darkness. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice the same rasp I had heard in the basement. "You came back." "I'm not Elizabeth," I managed to say, though my throat had nearly closed with fear. "My name is Lily Markham." He tilted his head, the movement too fluid, too wrong. "Markham," he repeated. "Yes, the bloodline continues." He said it would. He promised me new vessels when this one wore out. He took a step toward me, and I backed away. Dr. Reeves promised many things for his immortality. He failed, but I succeeded. Understanding dawned horribly. The experiments, the deaths, the transfer mentioned in the doctor's journal. They had been trying to transfer consciousness. Cheat death. And somehow, this orderly had succeeded where the doctors had failed. "What do you want from me?" I asked, still backing away, searching desperately for a weapon, an escape route, anything. "A vessel," he said simply. "This one is failing. You have the blood that resists. The Markham blood. Elizabeth fought me for years. Will you fight too, I wonder?" He lunged suddenly, inhumanly fast, hands outstretched toward my face. I ducked and ran, hearing him crash into a wall behind me. I raced down a corridor, no longer caring about finding an exit, just trying to put distance between us. I could hear him behind me, that dragging step growing faster, more urgent. I found a patient room with the door still intact and darted inside, slamming the door and looking frantically for something to barricade it. There was nothing but a rusted bed frame. I dragged it across the floor, wedging it against the door just as the orderly reached it. The door shuddered as he threw himself against it. The bed frame held, but I didn't know for how long. "You can't hide, Lily Markham," came his voice, somehow inside the room with me despite the closed door. "I've waited so long for a suitable vessel, since your great Aunt Elizabeth denied me, left me trapped in this failing flesh." Great Aunt Elizabeth? I had no great aunt by that name. At least, none that I had ever been told about. The pounding on the door stopped, and for a moment I dared to hope he had given up. Then I heard a scraping sound, metal on metal, a key turning in a lock. The door opened, pushing the bed frame aside as if it weighed nothing. The orderly stood in the doorway, a key in his hand, the same key I had found earlier, with the number 237. I was in room 237. See, he said, holding up the key. I led you here. I've been leading you since you arrived. Your blood called to me, woke me from my slumber. He stepped into the room, and I pressed myself against the far wall, trapped. He moved closer, his face splitting into that terrible smile again. Don't worry, he whispered. It won't hurt much. I closed my eyes, waiting for his touch, for whatever horror would come next. But instead, there was a deafening crash. My eyes flew open to see a section of the ceiling collapse, brought down by the force of the storm and years of neglect. Water poured in, and with it came a surge of wind that caught the orderly, throwing him against the wall. I didn't wait to see if he recovered. I bolted to the door and ran, following the sound of the storm, heading toward what I hoped was the weakened part of the building where I might find a way out. I found myself in a corridor where part of the roof had indeed collapsed, rain pouring in and flooding the floor. The wind was fierce, but it was my only chance. I climbed onto a fallen beam, using it to reach the jagged opening in the ceiling. The orderly's howl of rage echoed through the hospital as I pulled myself up and out onto the roof. The storm hit me full force, nearly knocking me off my feet. Rain lashed at my face, making it hard to see. I could make out the edge of the roof and what looked like a fire escape on the side of the building. I moved carefully across the slick surface, fighting against the wind. Behind me, I heard more of the roof giving way, collapsing into the building. And emerging from the hole I had climbed through, his movements jerky but determined, was the orderly. No escape, he called, his voice somehow carrying over the storm. No escape from your legacy, Lily Markham. I reached the fire escape and began to descend, the metal slippery and treacherous under my hands. Above me, the orderly had reached the edge of the roof. He looked down at me, those black pit eyes reflecting nothing, not even the lightning that flashed overhead. And then he stepped off the roof, not climbing down the fire escape as I expected, stepping into empty air, dropping toward me with that same terrible smile. He hit the platform just above me with sound like rotten fruit hitting pavement, his body crumpling in a way that should have meant death for any human being. But he wasn't human, not anymore. Even as I watched in horror, his limbs began to straighten, bones realigning with wet cracking sounds. I scrambled down the fire escape, reaching the bottom and jumping the last few feet to the ground. The mud sucked at my boots as I ran toward the tree line, hoping to lose him in the woods. The storm was beginning to subside, the rain lessening, the wind dying down. In the growing quiet, I could hear behind me, his dragging footsteps splashing through puddles. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs threatened to give out. The trees provided some cover, but I knew he was still following, tracking me by some sense beyond normal human perception. After what seemed like hours, I broke through the tree line and saw lights in the distance. A highway, cars passing, civilization, safety. I stumbled toward it, hope giving me a final burst of energy. Behind me, the dragging footsteps had stopped. I dared to look back. The orderly stood at the edge of the trees, watching me. He made no move to follow as I crossed the open field toward the highway. When I reached the road and flagged down a passing truck, he was still there, a dark silhouette against the darker woods. The truck driver, a kind-faced man in his 50s, rolled down his window. "You all right, miss? You look like you've been through hell." "Please," I gasped. "I need to get away from here." He looked past me toward the woods. "What happened to you?" "I was exploring the old mental hospital," I said, climbing into the passenger seat without waiting for an invitation. "Got trapped in the storm. Please, can you drive?" "Now." He nodded, putting the truck in gear. As we pulled away, I looked back one last time. The orderly was gone, but I could feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting. The truck driver glanced at me with concern. "That old place is dangerous. Roof's been collapsing for years. You're lucky you got out." "Yes," I agreed hollowly. "Lucky." He dropped me at a motel in the next town, refusing payment when I offered it. I checked in under a false name, something I'd never done before. Then I sat on the bed, shaking, trying to process what had happened. My camera was gone, lost somewhere in the hospital. With it, all evidence of what I had seen, what I had discovered, all except the key, which I was shocked to find still clutched in my hand, so tightly that it had left an impression in my palm. I should have thrown it away. Instead, I placed it on the nightstand and lay down, exhaustion finally overcoming fear. I dreamed of corridors that stretched and twisted, of whispers that called my name, of black pit eyes watching me from shadows. And I dreamed of Elizabeth Markham, a woman with my face, strapped to a table while doctors performed their terrible experiments. In the dream, she turned to look at me and whispered, "He's bound to the hospital. As long as you stay away, you're safe. But he's patient. He'll wait for another Markham to come looking." I woke with start, morning light filtering through thin curtains. For a moment, I thought I was back in my apartment, that the whole experience had been a nightmare. Then I saw the key on the nightstand. It's been 3 months since that night. I haven't posted any videos, haven't gone near another abandoned building. My subscribers think I've quit, sending me messages asking where I've gone, why I've abandoned them. I haven't had the courage to tell them what happened. Who would believe me? I tried researching the Markham connection, spending sleepless nights digging through genealogy websites and local records. That's when I found her, Elizabeth Markham, my great-aunt, who had been committed to Whispering Pines in 1986 and reportedly died there a year later. There was no death certificate, just a brief newspaper mention of her passing. No cause of death listed. The dreams haven't stopped. Each night, I return to those halls, and each night, Elizabeth shows me more. The experiments, the doctors harvesting something from her blood, Dr. Reeves and his obsession with immortality, and the orderly, Thomas Blackwood, who volunteered as the first test subject and somehow survived when all others died. Last week, I received a package. No return address, postmarked from the small town near Whispering Pines. Inside was a patient file, Elizabeth's file, with pages of medical notes and observations. A single line was highlighted. Subject exhibits extraordinary regenerative properties in blood samples. Cellular death delayed by approximately 400% compared to control samples. Tucked into the file was a newspaper clipping I hadn't found in my research. Fire destroys wing of local psychiatric hospital. Dated November 1987, it detailed how a mysterious fire had gutted the east wing of Whispering Pines, killing several patients and staff. The article mentioned that the hospital director, Dr. Malcolm Reeves, was among the casualties, his body identified only by dental records. But the orderly, Thomas Blackwood, wasn't listed among the dead. At the bottom of the clipping, handwritten in faded ink, "He waits for the bloodline. He always waits." I threw the package away, trying to convince myself it was an elaborate prank, perhaps from a subscriber who had tracked me down. But deep down I knew the handwriting matched the journal entries I had seen in the hospital. Last night, I dreamed of Elizabeth again. We stood in room 237, but this time she wasn't strapped to a table. She faced me, her eyes filled with determination that bordered on madness. Despite being different genders, there was something eerily similar in our features, a family resemblance that transcended time. "He can't leave the hospital," she said, her voice echoing strangely. I made sure of that. Bound him there with my blood, with my life. But he's growing stronger, finding ways to reach out. The storm weakened the binding. What does he want? I asked, though I already knew. What they all wanted. Life. Continuation. Your blood carries what mine did. Resistance. Longevity. He needs it to create a new vessel, one that won't decay like the others. How do I stop him? Elizabeth's face twisted into a pained smile. You can't. Not completely, but you can strengthen the binding. Finish what I started. She told me what I needed to do, the ritual that would bind Thomas Blackwood more securely to the hospital grounds. It would require me to return to Whispering Pines, to face him again. I woke drenched in sweat, the key from the hospital burning hot on my nightstand, though I knew that was impossible. When I reached for it, my fingers came away stained with what looked like blood. 3 days ago, I made my decision. I packed my car with the supplies Elizabeth had specified in my dream. Sage, salt, iron filings, a silver mirror, and a knife with a bone handle that I had to special order from an occult shop online. and my own blood. That was key. My blood, freely given, to reinforce Elizabeth's binding. I drove back to West Virginia under clear skies. No storm this time to trap me inside. Whispering Pines looked different in daylight. Less imposing, more pathetic. Decay made visible. Part of the roof had indeed collapsed, presumably where I had escaped that night. The front door stood open, as if waiting for me. I hesitated on the threshold, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But I thought of Elizabeth, of what she had sacrificed to keep Thomas Blackwood contained. If I ran, he would eventually find another way out, another Markham to target. So I entered, equipment bag over my shoulder, camera in hand once more. Not to document for my subscribers this time, but to have some record if I didn't make it out. I've come back. I called out, my voice steady despite my fear. Thomas Blackwood, I've come to finish this. The hospital remained silent, dust motes dancing in the beams of sunlight that penetrated the broken windows. I moved deeper inside, toward room 237, where Elizabeth had told me the binding needed to be reinforced. The corridors didn't shift this time, didn't try to confuse me. It was as if the hospital itself was allowing me passage, guiding me to my destination. I found room 237 easily, the door standing slightly ajar. Inside, the room was as I remembered, small, decayed, with the rusted bed frame still pushed against the wall, where I had tried to use it as a barricade. The floor beneath the collapsed section of ceiling was warped from water damage, but the rest of the room was surprisingly intact. I set up my supplies as Elizabeth had instructed, salt in a circle around the center of the room, iron filings sprinkled in specific patterns within the circle, sage burning in the four corners. The silver mirror I placed in the center of the circle, its surface reflecting the ceiling above. Then came the hard part. I took the bone-handled knife and, steeling myself, drew its edge across my palm. Blood welled up, bright red against my skin. I let it drip onto the mirror, watching as it spread across the silver surface in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, almost like writing. Blood of my blood. I recited, the words coming from some knowledge that wasn't quite my own. I bind you to this place, Thomas Blackwood. I seal you within these walls, never to follow the Markham line again. The air in the room grew dense, charged like the moment before a lightning strike. The temperature dropped sharply, my breath fogging before me. From behind me came that familiar dragging step. I didn't turn around. Elizabeth had been clear about that. I must not look at him directly during the ritual. You came back, rasped his voice, closer than I expected. I knew you would. The blood always calls the blood. I'm not here to give you what you want, I said, continuing to let my blood drip onto the mirror. I'm here to make sure you never hurt anyone again. He laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. Elizabeth said the same thing. Before I took pieces of her, pieces she never got back. A cold finger traced the back of my neck, and it took every ounce of willpower not to flinch, not to turn around. Your great aunt was strong, he continued, circling me, always just at the edge of my peripheral vision. She fought me for years. But in the end, even she couldn't escape her blood's destiny. And neither will you, the last male Markham. She did escape. I countered, my voice stronger now. She bound you here. She stopped you. Temporarily, he hissed. A minor setback. And now you return to free me, whether you know it or not. His hand shot out, grabbing my wrist, stopping the blood from falling onto the mirror. His touch was like ice, sending pain shooting up my arm. Your blood, he whispered, his face now inches from mine, those bottomless eyes staring into my soul. The last Markham. With it, I can finally leave this place. I struggled against his grip, but he was inhumanly strong. The knife clattered from my hand onto the floor outside the salt circle. Thomas smiled, revealing those blackened teeth. I've waited so long, he said, pulling my arm toward his mouth. In desperation, I grabbed the silver mirror with my free hand and smashed it into his face. He screamed, a sound that couldn't have come from a human throat, releasing my arm as he clawed at his face. Where the silver had touched him, his skin smoked and bubbled. I scrambled away, retrieving the knife. Thomas recovered quickly, his face already healing, the burned flesh knitting itself back together. That, he growled, was unwise. He lunged for me, but stopped abruptly at the edge of the salt circle, as if hitting an invisible wall. His expression twisted with rage. "What have you done?" he demanded. I held up my bleeding palm. "Exactly what Elizabeth told me to do. Blood of my blood, freely given. The circle is complete." The room began to shake, dust and plaster raining down from the ceiling. The salt circle glowed with a faint blue light, and the iron filings moved on their own, forming symbols I didn't recognize. Thomas threw himself against the invisible barrier, howling with rage. "You can't do this. I won't be in prison again." "You won't be," I said, understanding suddenly what Elizabeth meant by finishing what she started. This wasn't just about reinforcing the binding. It was about ending it, ending him. I retrieved a shard of the broken mirror and sliced deeper into my palm, letting the blood flow freely now. With my blood, I don't bind you, I banish you. What was unnaturally kept, I release. What was wrongfully taken, I reclaim. Thomas's form began to flicker, like a television losing signal. One moment he was an orderly in a stained uniform, the next something else entirely. Something dark and shapeless and ancient. "No!" he shrieked, his voice distorting. "The blood is mine. The life is mine." "It never was," I said, completing the ritual with words that came from Elizabeth, from some genetic memory passed down through our shared blood. "Return to dust, Thomas Blackwood. Your time is done." The room filled with a blinding light, and Thomas's screams reached a pitch that shattered the remaining windows. His form stretched and twisted, pulled apart by invisible forces. And then silence. Where Thomas had stood was nothing but a pile of dust, already dispersing in the draft from the broken windows. The ritual had worked, but at a cost. My vision darkened around the edges, blood loss making me dizzy. I managed to wrap my hand with a bandage from my bag before I collapsed onto the floor. I don't know how long I lay there, drifting in and out of consciousness. When I finally managed to stand, the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the hospital corridors. I gathered my supplies, took one last look at room 237, and left Whispering Pines. As I walked away, I heard the building groan behind me, turning. I watched as more of the roof collapsed, walls caving in as if the structure itself was exhaling its final breath. By the time I reached my car, half the hospital had crumbled into rubble. Whatever force had preserved it, Thomas's unnatural presence, perhaps, was gone. It's been a year since that day. I've started making videos again, though I stay away from abandoned hospitals. My subscribers welcome me back, accepting my vague explanation about needing a break after a traumatic experience. The dreams of Elizabeth have stopped, but sometimes, in that space between waking and sleeping, I feel her presence, a grateful whisper, a sense of peace finally attained. The key from room 237 sits in a small box on my shelf, a reminder of what happened and what could have happened. Sometimes it catches the light in a way that makes it look like it's covered in blood, but that's just a trick of the eye. I think I had my blood tested after returning from Whispering Pines. The doctor was fascinated by what he found, some rare genetic marker he wanted to study further. I declined and never went back. Some things are better left unexplored. But sometimes when I pass an abandoned building, I feel a pull, an urge to step inside and document its forgotten stories. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I hear footsteps following me, dragging, scraping footsteps that stop when I turn around. Just my imagination, I tell myself. Thomas Blackwood is gone, banished by blood and ritual and the collapse of his prison. But late at night, when the wind howls like whispers and shadows move in ways they shouldn't, I remember his final words, distorted and fading, but still clear enough to haunt my dreams. Blood calls to blood, and there's always more blood. I keep the bone-handled knife close now, just in case, because I know what Elizabeth knew. Some things can never truly be destroyed, only contained. And some bloodlines carry burdens that can never be fully escaped. So if you're watching this, yes, this video I swore I'd never make, know that I'm not sharing this story as entertainment. I'm sharing it as a warning. Stay away from Whispering Pines. Stay away from abandoned hospitals with too many shadows and too much history. And if you ever find yourself trapped in a place where the corridors shift and whispers call your name, remember, Don't look back. Don't listen to the whispers. And never, ever follow the dragging footsteps. Because some things follow you home. And some stories don't end when you think they do. This is Lucas Markham, signing off. For the last time,